Hi guys, welcome back to Mer Murder, where we put the myrrh into murder. I am your host, Mercedes Rose, and I just want to say thank you all so much for being back for another week. I don't really have much to say today. Just as a little intro, life has been pretty good. Life has been great. You know what I was thinking actually? I feel like every year that you took from someone else's life is the years that should be added to your sentence. So like if you murdered someone who was 18 years old, you need to have 18 years added to your sentence, you know? I think that's really fair because all the times where like people get manslaughter when they really actually just blatantly fucking killed somebody. Like I think like all those times that people get off so easy, like 10 years for murder, 8 years, 7 years. I feel like if you add the additional, like say somebody killed someone who was 43, they have to be like, wow, I was gonna get 10 years, but I have an additional 43 to live. And then they have to sit in prison just thinking about how all these years that are passing are the years that someone lived. I feel like that's so impactful. Imagine you're sitting in prison and you're like, ooh, I could have gotten out yesterday, but I still have to be here for an additional 43. And you're sitting there really like feeling how long that time is and how much longer you're sitting in there and how much more time your life is just being wasted away. And you're just like, wow. Like, holy shit, this is a long time. Like, that's a long time someone lived. Or like if somebody had to do an additional year because they killed like a baby and they're like, dang, like this is only a year. Like I served 15, 20, and I get an additional year that I got to serve. But like, that's how short this person's life was that I took. Like, I just feel like psychologically that fucks somebody up. I think so. And that's what we got to be doing to people that murder. We got to be fucking them up. But yeah, that's really all I got for you guys. Let's just get into today's case. Again, thank you so much for supporting the show. Please, when you have the chance, go ahead and follow, subscribe, like, rate the show, comment, leave me some reviews. I read every review that I get, and I thank you guys so much for putting in your 2 cents because it is very much appreciated around these parts. So thank you all so much, and let's get into today's case. Welcome back to the Mer Murder U.S. Serial Killer series. Like I said in the first episode of the series, we will be covering lesser-known serial killer cases so that our lesser-known victims can gain more exposure. So if you have any super famous serial killers in mind for any of the states, prepare to be disappointed as I will probably not be talking about their case. But let's also remember fame is super subjective. There are so many true crime cases, unfortunately, but there are also so many people who haven't heard every single one. Some people walking this earth right now have no idea who Jeffrey Dahmer is. So if I do discuss a case that you do know pretty well, do not call me a hypocrite. I do try to choose cases that I do not know or am not familiar with at all, and not to toot my own horn or anything, but I do know a lot of true crime cases. I have been in this game for like 15 years now, and even the people who have been in it for 50 haven't really heard every single case, you know? And there's still cases happening as we speak, unfortunately. So please give me grace if there is grace that needs to be given. And also, let's remember, in order for a monster to make the list, they have to be born native to the state that they also committed most of their murders in. So without further ado, we will be venturing on to our next state, Alaska, where we will be covering the serial killings carried out by James Dale Ritchie. James Dale Ritchie was born on November 4th, 1976 in Anchorage, Alaska. He grew up in Wonder Park, a lower middle class and culturally diverse neighborhood in East Anchorage. James grew up in a fairly normal home, living with his parents and 2 sisters. And there isn't much online that I could find regarding his upbringing and personal life, but when he was a teen, he attended Betty Davis East Anchorage High School in the early 90s. At just 18 years old, James stood at 6 foot 3 inches, securing himself a spot on the school's basketball and football teams. Ritchie went on to play in the 1994 championship games for each sport, playing alongside future professional athletes Trajan Langdon and Mao Tosi. James grew an impressive reputation as a standout athlete as well as a stellar student. So impressive, he was recruited by West Virginia University for their football team. Unfortunately, not too soon after enrolling in his classes and joining the university's football team, one of James's close friends, Quincy, passed away. This led to James's downward spiral where just after 1 semester, he dropped out of WVU. Now a college dropout, James had to find a way to occupy his time and also make money. Unfortunately for him and those around him, he chose a more felonious path, engaging in drug dealing and dogfighting in 1995. By 1998, he earned the street name Tiny, becoming more and more infamous in the streets. Over the course of 7 years, James was arrested numerous times on drug-related offenses, mainly centered around the possession and distribution of crack cocaine. At one point, he even earned himself 3 years probation for unlawful possession of not only cocaine, but also a .45 caliber handgun. His crimes would inevitably escalate in 2005 when he carried out a home invasion where he handcuffed the victim and burglarized their home in Anchorage. He was eventually caught with zip ties, 2 handguns, and $5,500 in cash and was sent to prison for 2 years. During his time in prison, he acquired a Colt Python handgun, a special type of revolver. But upon his release, he left the firearm with a friend of his as he was planning to move to Broadway, Virginia, where his parents were residing at the time. James remained under the radar during his time in Virginia. He had little to no run-ins with the law besides a couple moving violations. He was actually observed as a law-abiding citizen by those who knew him. But his time in Virginia didn't last very long as he found himself in the midst of a breakup with his girlfriend, prompting the now 39-year-old to move back to Alaska in March of 2016. Just 4 months after James's return to Alaska, a string of murders took place around the city of Anchorage, but investigators had a difficult time pinpointing who was committing these murders and why. On July 3, 2016, at 7 a.m., a bicyclist was biking along a path near Ship Creek. They were left stunned at around 7:45 a.m. when they pulled up to a scene where the bodies of 20-year-old Brianna Foisey and 41-year-old Jason Netter Sr. were sprawled out on the path. The cyclists immediately phoned 911 to report their gruesome findings, sending officers rushing to the scene. Officers from the Anchorage Police Department taped off the scene and began their investigation. It appeared that Brianna and Jason were possibly ambushed on the trail or attacked by someone they knew, as it didn't seem like the victims knew they were in any danger or tried to escape their fates. Their bodies weren't even moved from the path in an attempt to be hidden. They were left in the same exact spot that they were murdered. Officers were unable to conclude Brianna and Jason's relationship and why they were murdered together on this path. But just 2 days later, on July 5th, they publicly declared their deaths a double homicide. The officers had little to no information regarding the case, but as days passed and the bodies of Brianna and Jason were examined, detectives discovered that they both sustained gunshot wounds with bullets that could only belong to a Colt Python revolver. Investigators thought this was a pretty rare weapon to find attached to a random street killing, as they only saw this type of gun used by fellow law enforcement officers before more popular guns were created, such as Glocks and Smith & Wessons. You could only really find this type of handgun from someone's personal collection. Now, around this time in 2016, there was an uptick in gang violence, and families from rougher areas of the U.S. were moving away to try to protect and prevent their children from falling victim to the gang lifestyle. However, for some of these young adults, they were already in too deep and brought the gang violence with them. Investigators initially suspected the murders as possible gang violence or random gang attacks, so they did further digging into the victims. 41-year-old Jason Netter was a familiar face to law enforcement, but not for any violent crimes. Jason often found himself in trouble with the law due to missed child support payments as he had 2 children, and more recently in 2014, he caught a felony drug possession charge. But Brianna, our 20-year-old victim, was just a young woman with a difficult upbringing. Brianna was born with fetal alcohol syndrome and faced serious abuse and trauma in her early years of life, inevitably ending up in the foster care system. She and her older sister were adopted by her mother, Marcella Foisey, when she was 5 years old, and the sisters grew up alongside their other 4 siblings. Brianna was a sweet and lively little girl who had lots of friends and always stood up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. But as she grew older, her mental stability began to deteriorate as a direct result of the fetal alcohol syndrome. Brianna never took her mental health too seriously, even though her judgment had been growing more and more impaired. She began doing drugs, leading to a serious addiction, and even left home as she no longer wanted to follow the rules her mother had in place. According to those who knew her, she was, quote, home free, a term used to describe someone who was homeless by choice. And Marcella tried to help her daughter numerous times, checking up on her, speaking to her, taking her to treatment centers, but Brianna would insist that she would get clean on her own time whenever she was ready. So Marcella didn't have much of a choice. She could only meet her daughter where she was at that point of her life, still remaining close to her and taking her out for sushi whenever they met downtown. Brianna always sent her love to her siblings whenever she did see her mother, and was just content living her life the way she did. But she was never a violent person and never hung around anyone connected to gang activity. So investigators were left just as puzzled as they were when they first found their victims. Neither of them had any significant enemies, no connection to gang activity, and certainly no reason to be murdered. And just 26 days later, on July 29, 2016, 3 young girls reported the sounds of gunfire after witnessing a strange man lurking in the woods from their window, and they saw that same man leave with a bicycle shortly after the gunfire stopped. Officers reported to the scene within minutes of the phone call and discovered the body of 21-year-old Travion Thompson between Dubin Avenue and Boland Street. Nearby surveillance video actually captured the events that took place from the early hours of that morning, but due to the angle and positioning of the camera, only the lower half of the subjects can be seen. Travion is seen biking home from work on his black and yellow bicycle just after 3 a.m. Minutes later, a person is seen walking down the same street Travion just biked down. Then not even a minute later, that same person, now on Travion's bike, is seen biking back across the screen in the direction that they originally came from. The video was only able to help officers determine the time the incident took place, but not who the murderer was. So Police Sergeant Markovich ordered his officers to interview the witnesses and create a composite sketch of the man they saw just before the murder took place, eventually displaying the image all over Anchorage. Travion's body was taken in and examined, and to the officers' dismay, it was revealed to them that Travion had been shot multiple times to death. The bullets in his body matched the same bullets found in the victims Brianna and Jason just weeks before. These bullets could only be used in one type of gun, a Colt Python 357, the same gun they suspected was used in the previous murders. Just like in the case just a couple weeks prior, detectives did a quick background check into Travion Thompson to try to find some possible motive or reasoning. And although they discovered that his father, Bobby Thompson, was in prison, they quickly learned that Travion was very far from that path. According to his loved ones, Travion was a giant teddy bear. He graduated high school in 2014 and had long-term goals of enlisting in the military. He had a regular and stable job at Petco and volunteered at the local youth employment program. He enjoyed working out, hiking, riding his bike, spending time with his family, and even had a nerdy side to him, often spending his free time playing League of Legends, World of Warcraft, and had recently gotten into Pokemon Go. There was no violent past, no connection to drug activity or gang violence, nothing. Travion was just a kid on his way home from work who was in the right place but just at the wrong time. Investigators were left with the unsettling feeling that they might have a serial killer on their hands. However, they did not disclose this information to the public yet. In fact, they were very secretive about the entire investigation, releasing very little details about the murders, because the only concrete evidence that they did have was the fact that all 3 murders were carried out using the same weapon. The Anchorage Police Department feared that if the information were to somehow leak, it would allow their suspect time to either dispose of the murder weapon or switch methods, taking more lives. And unfortunately, 2 more lives would be taken regardless of that information being protected or not, just a month later on August 28, 2016. The body of 25-year-old Bryant Day Husson was discovered at 1:42 a.m. in Valley of the Moon Park. A woman who requested to remain anonymous discovered and reported his body, also stating that this person had been dead from apparent bullet wounds. Authorities rushed to the scene, fearing the worst, but the bad news wasn't over just yet. As officers arrived at the scene and they began canvassing the area, they stumbled upon a second body stuffed underneath a pavilion located on the park grounds. The body was later identified as 34-year-old Kevin Turner, a local homeless man who also suffered multiple gunshot wounds. There was very little evidence left at the scene of both of the crimes, making it almost impossible to come to any conclusions. Officers later discovered that Kevin Turner had been suffering from schizophrenia and bipolar disorder before he became homeless. However, he began staying at one of the city's homeless camps just before his passing. They also learned that 25-year-old Bryant Day Husson, better known as Bree by their friends, was a well-known local environmentalist. Bree's father told investigators that they were simply on their way to meet up with a friend late that night, and investigators believe that Bree may have run into the murderer while he was trying to conceal Kevin Turner's body, ultimately being murdered as well. Eventually, the Alaskan State Crime Lab confirmed what officers feared, that both Kevin and Bryant were murdered using the same exact weapon as the 3 previous murders. The Anchorage Police Department had no choice but to warn the public about the string of murders, advising the public to stay away from isolated trails after dark. A group of local citizens gathered at the Valley of the Moon Park, desperate for answers, as this would be the 4th and 5th murder to take place in just the span of 2 months. They were wondering what officers were doing to catch this person responsible, if they were really even safe anymore, and if the rumors of a serial killer were true. And frustrations in the crowd began to grow as detectives refused to confirm or deny whether there was a serial killer in their city or not. Still, only having one piece of information, which was the type of murder weapon linking all the crimes, they couldn't say anything more to the citizens besides advice on how to remain safe, and that they were trying their best to catch the person or people responsible. Eventually, the FBI was brought on to assist the APD with their investigation, and by September 6th, the mayor at the time, Ethan Berkowitz, held a press conference insisting to the public that the record-breaking number of murders were linked to random acts of gang violence, denying the possibility of a serial killer. Another 2 months would go by after that press conference. Another 2 months of fear for the citizens, another 2 months of questioning and investigating, and another 2 months of freedom for the killer. Until one day, the case took an unexpected turn. In the early hours of Saturday, November 12, 2016, 911 dispatchers in Anchorage received a call from a cab driver. The cab driver reported a man who received a ride from him, but upon reaching his destination, the man simply got out of the car and refused to pay for his ride. Officers surrounding the area of the 911 call were dispatched and told to be on the lookout for a man walking along 5th Avenue in the downtown Anchorage area. 2 officers closest to the scene took to the streets in hopes to resolve the matter, either by having the man pay his fare or arresting him for petty theft. Officer Arn Salau of the APD was first to arrive on 5th Avenue, and as he turned on the street, he saw a tall man walking along the sidewalk. While trailing the man in his police cruiser, he flashed his lights trying to get the man's attention in an attempt to get him to stop. However, the man continued on his path, ignoring the officer. Officer Salau got out of the car and requested the man to stop, but he was ignored again. He returned to his car, continuing down the street behind the man, announcing that he was with the Anchorage police and demanding that the man stopped. This time around, the mysterious man stopped, but only to turn around and begin walking towards Officer Salau's vehicle. As the 38-year-old officer exited his vehicle, he was met with an array of bullets, getting struck 5 times. The gunman coldly turned away and began walking down his initial path, but it wasn't too long after the eruption of gunfire that 34-year-old Sergeant Mark Patsky turned down the corner of 5th Street and Cordova, witnessing the brutal attack. Sergeant Patsky immediately fired his weapon, striking the gunman multiple times. He called for backup as well as an ambulance for both the wounded Officer Salau and the suspect, but the shooter would die in that exact spot before help could even arrive. Luckily, Officer Salau survived his multiple gunshot wounds, and he was able to be stabilized after a 7-hour surgery needed to repair the damage to his spine, intestines, and liver. The now deceased suspect was revealed to have nothing to do with the initial taxi fare dispute. In fact, he was nothing like what the cab driver described. But officers couldn't help but notice the .357 Colt Python revolver glued to his hand. The same type of gun used in the 5 murders of the Anchorage locals just 3 to 4 months prior. Upon investigating, officers identified the man as 40-year-old James Dale Ritchie, the Anchorage native with a not-so-favorable past. The weapon was confiscated and sent to the crime lab, and to investigators' surprise, the gun was proven to be the exact weapon used in the murders of Brianna Foisey, Jason Netter Sr., Travion Thompson, Bree DeHusson, and Kevin Turner. By sheer luck, the APD had finally caught their serial killer. After 78 hours of investigation, the Anchorage Police Department and FBI were able to confidently say that James Dale Ritchie was in fact responsible for the 5 murders that took place from July to August, and shortly after, a press conference was held. APD Chief Chris Tolley confirmed to the public that they were in fact investigating the murders of Brianna, Jason, Travion, Bree, and Kevin as a serial killing case. However, they did not want to reveal too much to the public out of fear that they would allow their suspect an opportunity to get away with the murders. However, the chief explained that the citizens of Anchorage, Alaska did not have to worry anymore, as they not only caught the perpetrator of the killings, but he was already dead. They explained that the evidence pointing to Ritchie was overwhelming, such as the bullets matching the weapon found on him, and the striking similarities to him and the composite sketch completed after Travion's murder. And on April 26, 2017, spokesperson Renee Oistad announced that James Dale Ritchie was the sole person responsible for the 5 murders and 1 attempted murder from the year prior, and that the case was finally closed. The citizens of Anchorage were finally able to sleep a little better at night, knowing that the dangerous criminal they feared but did not know was fully off the streets. And not only off the streets, but also dead. But unfortunately for the friends and family of Brianna, Jason, Travion, Bree, and Kevin, they were already used to having to learn how to sleep a little differently at night. They were left to learn how to sleep without feeling completely whole, as they had lost someone near and dear to them, all for apparently nothing. Our 5 victims from today's case should be here. They didn't deserve to die, regardless of what decisions they made in life. None of them were more or less worthy of life, and it certainly wasn't Ritchie's right to decide so. During my research, I actually learned that Bobby Dwayne Thompson, Travion Thompson's father, who was incarcerated, was actually childhood friends with James Ritchie. I think there's something especially devastating about a man who ended up in prison, yet did the work to raise an upstanding citizen for a son, who only ended up being murdered by someone that he knew as a kid. I don't think James Ritchie was aware at the time that Travion's father was somebody he had grown up with, but none of that really matters. He had no right to take the lives of the 5 people that he did in today's case. And I hope their families have found some sort of peace knowing that justice made its way to Ritchie way faster than expected, and that in his final moments, deservedly so, he felt the same pain that he brought upon their undeserving loved ones. And we are now in the part of today's case where we do our police/investigator rating and our judge/jury rating. Obviously, today's case will not include a ranking for the judge and jury, as they didn't need to be brought into this case because our serial killer was murdered. But I will say the APD played a very large role in today's case, and I will be giving them a B+. I can understand that there's not much they could do with what they were given, and there was little to no evidence left at the crime scenes. I kind of wonder about that, because maybe it was just a quick run, shoot these people and go, but I'm hoping that they didn't do anything that was kind of reckless, or maybe the elements had something to do with that. I'm not sure. I do think that they did the best with what they were given. This may be controversial, but I do think hiding some information to the public is smart in these cases, specifically this one. Sometimes it's not at all, and you really should just let people know what's going on. But in this case, Anchorage is small. I just know that Alaska in general does not have a huge population. Anchorage is not big, especially not compared to the other U.S. states, but there wasn't much they could do. There weren't a lot of people, and then innocent people dropping like flies, and they have only one thing to say: yeah, we know who is or how this person is murdering them. That's not really going to do much for the public anyway. So I think it was a smart choice to just keep the information that they did have to themselves. And by the grace of God, the universe, whatever you guys believe in, they got this guy just by sheer luck. And I hope they thank whoever they believe in every day for that, because this easily could have gone a completely different way. I think the only thing I'm really docking points for is the fact that they let the locals kind of fester in fear. I know I did say that they made the right decision by not sharing too much information, but just telling them, oh, be aware of isolated trails and don't go out at night is very okay. Nobody really chooses to do those kind of things anyway. Some people just live different lifestyles. You can't really choose if you're going to be out at a certain time. Travion was just biking home. He can't control when he gets off of work. It's just things like that. I think they could have done a lot more. I'm not sure. I didn't have any concrete information on this or not, but I think they could have done more protecting the general public, increasing the police presence, and whenever the suspected hours that this person was, James, not this person, whenever James was out carrying the murders, I think during those times and hours, because obviously they found all their victims very early in the morning, midnight, early hours in the morning, they could have had more officers canvassing the areas, protecting the people, getting the homeless population into shelters, making sure they were protected. But again, the APD is a pretty small police force. They only have 374 sworn officers, and cities in the U.S. with similar population sizes like Plano, Texas, Stockton, California, they have police forces that are 420 to 480, almost 500 officers. So it's obviously different. And I can imagine that suggestions have all hands on deck and have all your officers out doing things when you have a whole city to look after. That's probably a big ask, but I don't know. Overall, I think that they did what they could. I think they did try their best, but that's the only thing I could really say. Maybe you could have just protected your people more. If you couldn't even give them any more information, you could have at least just shown up and been there, and they could see officers out and say, we are trying our best to protect you. We will be out there at night with you. And they're putting their lives at risk every day. So it's not something they're not used to. Not saying that they should and they deserve to be out there putting their life on the line, but that's just a part of the job. So they should have been willing to do that. Not sure if they were or not, but if they weren't, that's what they should have been doing. But yeah, overall, I think the officers really did do the best they could. I just can't shake the feeling that James was just captured by sheer luck, if that person didn't call to report the guy walking out on his money and the officers weren't there that night to just see James walking on a random night, what are the odds that everything lines up? But I guess everything happens for a reason. Nobody, the universe, whoever we believe in, your God, anybody, just was like, we got to help these people out. This is a small community and we can't keep letting this guy get away with it. You can't keep getting away with this. So yeah, the officers in APD will be getting a B+ from me. Good work, good enough work. And thank all your lucky stars. But yeah, this is the end of today's episode and the second episode of our U.S. serial killer series. My sources for this week's case have been adn.com, Beyond Evil on YouTube, legacy.com, and wikipedia.org. Thank you guys so much for listening to this week's case. Thank you so much for supporting the show. Thank you for everything you do for me and just showing up, being here every day, being good people. I hope you guys are on your best behavior when you're not sitting here listening to me or doing whatever you're doing right now while you listen. Just thank you all so much. Please take care of yourselves, take care of one another. Tell the people that you love in your life that you love them. You never know when it's going to be their last. I think we take that for granted so bad in life. Just being mad at people, and obviously if they're undeserving, you don't gotta bend and break your rules or your boundaries for anybody. But the people that you do love in your life, tomorrow is not promised, and that is something that you should take away from every true crime episode that you ever hear, whether it's mine or not. Every story that you hear and learn about, just make sure you tell the people in your life that you love them, because you really never know when it's going to be their last. And I just want you guys to know that I love you. You don't got to come out here and be crazy people and serial killers. Just know that somebody in the world is thinking of you, loves you, and wants the best for you. And you have to want the best for yourself. So if you're going through a hard time right now, don't resort to violence or anger. Try to work through it. Try to find some healthy coping mechanisms. And yeah, I know the time is really tough right now and the world is crazy and there's so much insane stuff going on. But please, let's look after one another and protect each other and care for one another and care about yourselves. Put yourself first whenever you can. But yeah, I love you guys so much. Thank you for supporting the show. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, follow, rate, everything you can to support the show. I would greatly appreciate it. But that's all from me, and I can't wait to see you guys next week as we put the Mer in Murder. Bye.